And I think that my mind, my multiple intelligences lean towards linguistic and definitely more on the creative side. So having to be forced to memorize equations and formulas, that's just not how my brain works. My brain works in memorizing stories and in having that human connection. And so finding community that actually valued that. And I believe that it was early on with all of my teachers and in the stories that I was reading and eventually meeting authors and just knowing, oh, okay, this is actually a really, really beautiful thing. And I don't have to conform to anyone's standard of intelligence because this is my own, and just finally really coming to terms with that.
Well, I love the San Gabriel Valley.
Welcome to the My SGV podcast.
So I grew up here and I still live in Alhambra.
I was raised in between Temple City and Alhambra.
Eventually resided in South San Gabriel.
Our mission is to capture and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley.
Monterey Park has pretty much been my whole life.
Well, I'm proud to say that I was born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley.
We believe our diversity is what makes the SGV great. And no matter where you are from in the San Gabriel Valley, you will feel welcome. All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the My SGV podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If you are new here, welcome. We bring you the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley. And if you are a returning listener, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We very much appreciate it. Victoria, listeners of the show know that you've been home educated and then went on to college at UC San Diego, right?
Yes, that's correct.
What was the biggest difference that you I guess, experience between learning at home and then learning in that setting?
I think the schedule, having scheduled class time. Yeah, I think that was like the biggest adjustment, schooling wise, was that. Then, yeah, because I was like homeschooling, you can learn how to study on your own, learn on your own, or at least like make yourself do it. Yeah, so it's just making sure I went to class, especially since I guess universities do attendance now. According to mom and dad, they didn't used to do that, so it was easier just to skip class and just study on your own. But yeah, I had to be there in class. So
I have a story that I don't think I shared on this podcast before. When I was showing you Final Cut Pro and merging 4 video files and 1 audio file and how to cut and edit and do all this, I'm showing you and you're watching and you're not taking a single note. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't really know your learning style, right? And at that time, it was very early on in our working relationship. I was like, okay, there's a lot of information there, right? And you grasp it. And I don't know what you did afterwards to hone your skills, but I was like, wow, okay. It's not so much just your ability to grasp the information, but you were confident in yourself. Like you were like, oh, I got it. And if you didn't get it, you would do something different, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what you want of a self-driven learner, right? Mm-hmm. But I remember that I was like, oh, okay. And so that was sort of like the framework on how we're going to work together going forward, right? I was like, okay, like you've got it. And if you don't got it, you're going to say you don't got it. And yeah, I just always remember that. Yeah, because it was a lot of information, and I think relatively new to you, right? It wasn't like something you were familiar with, like learning something completely new. Yeah. So that was a fun story I wanted to share. That my family we home educate, and one of these things that my wife and I share with our girls is how much information we were forced to memorize, regurgitate, and then like almost instantaneously gone. Like as soon as like here's the test, and then I lost all that information, right? But there was like a lot of stress, unhappiness, just I didn't know what I'm going to use this for, and I still to this day like I don't use algebra. Yeah. And we're like, well, what was all that for? But the things that I was like really interested in, picked it up really easily, retained it, forever. And, these are the things that we try to, show our kids,
Yeah.
just foster their curiosity really, and then let them shine.
Yeah.
So, well, let's get to today's guest. Today's guest is shaking up the world of education with her bold vision and tireless dedication to reimagining how kids learn. As a Latina leader and co-founder of the California Microschool Collective, she's been advocating for personalized, trauma-informed learning environments since 2024 through her nonprofit microschool, Ellemercito Academy, and her work with Compass Educators. She's empowering students to think critically, embrace a growth mindset, and develop empathy through experiential, place-based learning. With over 17 years of experience, a master's in education, and numerous accolades like the Vela Next Step Grant and ASU Prep Microschool Entrepreneur Fellowship, she's not just about ideas, she's about action. From organizing the largest free virtual summer camp in the U.S. during the pandemic, to speaking at national conferences and being featured at Harvard's Emerging School Models Conference, she's on a mission to create joyful, limitless learning experiences for all children. Let's give a warm welcome to Lizette Valles. Lizette, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Mostly because like the connection with like helping to kids to really just, I guess, really reach their own potential, like not like sort of burn out their own curiosity in learning. So, Lizette, let's start with, what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
Well, born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley, born in Monterey Park, and pretty much have lived my entire life on the same street in Almani, and I just love SGV.
You were born in Monterey Park at Garfield.
I was.
Okay. And did you live
Yes.
at any time in Monterey Park?
I didn't live in Monterey Park, but we lived in Almani forever, and still do.
You still live in El Monte.
Mm-hmm.
And what was life like growing up in El Monte?
Well, I have to say that I think being raised by a single mom, she was very, very, I don't want to say overprotective, but she was a mama bear. So really try to make sure that I was safe, and she sent me to Nativity School, which, right by the Valley Mom. A lot of nuns were my teachers. So I grew up in that environment where education was prioritized and so incredibly valued. So I think it was a really good upbringing, a sense of security. There was a lot of gang activity where I grew up. So she was just trying to protect me and keep me safe. So, and then I eventually went on to Aurora High School, but yeah.
And how were you able to avoid, sort of that growing up?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, there wasn't a lot of that going on at the school where I attended. And if any of that started up, the nuns would just not have it. So it was pretty cool. There wasn't really room for a ton of behaviors that, weren't in alignment, with what they were teaching us. So I do remember having a babysitter, walk me to school and then walk me back until I was about in 6th grade. So I was super embarrassed. Like, wait a minute, I can walk. But it was just that level of, hey, I just want to keep my daughter safe. And looking back now, very, very grateful for all of that.
And were your parents also born here, or did they immigrate here?
So my mom immigrated when she was 15 years old, and she landed in Boyle Heights, and there was such a sense of shame on her end because she didn't speak English very well. And she just thought, oh my goodness, no one is going to understand me. And slowly but surely, she was able to adapt, and it was really good. But yeah, initially it was a shock to her.
And what about your father?
Yeah. And I actually didn't meet my dad until I was 38 years old. Sadly, it was an assault. That's how I was conceived. And so the goal really was to meet him in order to garner an apology for my mom. And, he didn't admit to anything, but it was a sense of closure for my mom and for myself.
Oh my.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
You sought out to
I did
get that for your mom?
And my brother pretty much was like, hey, you think you're an Avenger? It's like, no, I just want to make sure that she, you know, as she's getting older, that respect and that sense of closure really again for her was something that I was pursuing for her well-being.
Wow, I can't imagine what that must have been like.
It was a challenge, but I want to say it was probably one of the most significant events in my life and also in my mom's. And it did bring about, you know, this whole other sense of forgiveness, but forgiveness does not equal access, you know, so that type of mindset. But a lot of letting go, a lot of understanding, and a lot of moving forward.
So you grew up without him?
I did, yeah. So mainly my mom, who was raising me with a lot of help from my grandma, and between the two of them, very, very strong women, and a lot of influence from my teachers. I mean, you can see how being surrounded by, you know, so many positive influences that would have guided me like on the right path.
And what kind of child were you?
I was a very curious child. I was outside about 99% of my childhood. I was playing in the backyard in trees, and my mom would allow me to just have all of the freedom in the world in terms of like, you know, being outside and exploring. And my grandma was a seamstress for a while, so she had a lot of extra cloth, and I would end up using that cloth and having these make-believe stories, and so it was just one of that adventure. And it wasn't a big backyard, but for me, you know, I was creating worlds out there.
Wow. Your mom put you into that, I forget how you described it, the Catholic school.
Right.
And so education was really important to them.
Yes.
Yeah. And did they see that as only to keep you safe or as a path towards something
I think life? It was both. I think it was to keep me safe, but my mom, she did end up going to ELAC as an adult. She was about 50 when she went to ELAC, and she pursued, I think she may have received an associate's degree, but really her focus was on medical coding. And she worked in Amani for many, many years as a medical coder. But I think it was that they kind of put all of their aspirations, as many children, like first-gen students, experience. A lot of the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the family are then placed on the child. And I think that's what happened with me. And, you know, I gladly accepted that. And looking back now, I realize that I think I went through a very conventional form of schooling in order to eventually challenge the status quo and disrupt in the best way possible.
Yeah. Well, kudos to your mom to go back at 50.
Oh, I know. I was so proud of her.
Yeah.
So proud of her.
So it sounds like your mom and your grandma were really influential in your life. Right. Were there other mentors or people that you had at that early age?
Absolutely. So I would say that Sister E, it's short for Sister Elizabeth, she was one of the nuns who was my teacher, and she taught advanced English in 7th and 8th grade to all of us. And essentially I wanted to drop her class because I thought, okay, this is so difficult. I don't necessarily love grammar. I love literature and I love writing and reading, but the I guess constraints of grammar were of no interest to me. And slowly but surely I started realizing that what she was doing was teaching me how to harness English so that I could, in a sense, master it and then make it my own. And that I did end up becoming an English major directly because of her influence.
Wow.
So she passed away at 104 years old. The last time I saw her was in the convent, and I took my husband and I believe my son and a few friends and former students of hers. And it was so nice because I was able to tell her, you know, the impact that she had on my life.
Wow. That's beautiful. 104.
104.
And how old was she when you went back?
Well, she was probably like 102. I think I saw her a couple years before she passed. She was elderly, yeah. And when she was teaching us, oh man, I want to say she was probably like in her 80s maybe, or yeah, or maybe, no, she must have been younger. She was younger. But I mean, that stern, Irish accent, and just so much love, but also it was a tough sort of love.
She must have had a lot of wisdom.
A lot of wisdom.
Yeah. And what kind of student were you?
I actually was a very attentive, conscientious student. I really enjoy listening to Edgar Allan Poe, and because most of the nuns came from Ireland, not most of them, but all of them came from Ireland, their main focus was English. So I don't really remember a ton about math or science, but I do remember leaning into our English classes and raising my hand and learning about character development. And so all of that molded and shaped me to love literature. And she would turn off the lights. This is Sister Dorothy, another teacher. She would turn off the lights and read Edgar Allan Poe, and the telltale heart with the thumping of the heartbeat. And I just thought it was so fascinating. So they again created these worlds where we could escape into, and I think I've always found that really fascinating.
What was your motivation for learning at that time? Like, was it still curiosity? Was it just because you thought that this is what you're supposed to do?
I think it was curiosity, but it was also that these stories came to life for me in a way that nothing else kind of did during that time. So I could visualize the characters, I could visualize all of it, and it just drew me in so much that it was a source of deep joy for me. And it was something that I was actually good at. I don't remember specifically math. I've never been a strong math student. And so there was something that I found to be whimsical in some of the stories, not Edgar Allan Poe necessarily, not those short stories, but in other stories, in the Chronicles of Narnia maybe, I'm like, oh, we're having Turkish delight? What? I mean, we actually get to eat what is being mentioned in the book. So having that experiential learning provided to me at a young age definitely influenced how I then, relate to my students.
Wow, I have so many questions here. Like, what was the demographic like? Were they all like Latino students?
Yes. So the majority, I would say about 80% of us were Latinos, and then there was a few Asian students, a few white students, and we didn't really have any Black or African American students ever. But I mean, it's Amani, so I think now the demographic is starting to change. But back in the 90s, it was mainly Latinos.
Yeah, I'm just picturing this demographic with these Irish nuns,
exactly,
and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting.
Yes.
Right. My other question is like, so students, if especially with math, right, if they don't consider themselves good at math, or if they're doing poorly, maybe they feel a certain way about themselves, and it's a real struggle, and that can even bring down everything else, right, that they're excelling.
Yeah.
You describe yourself not being good at math, but you're also describing like seeing your talents in this other area.
Right.
How did they handle students or you who maybe weren't as good at that?
Yeah, I think that there was a level of, they probably wanted us to be well-rounded, but there wasn't as much emphasis on the other subjects. It was more so coming from perhaps, my mom and my grandma, and they were really good at math. And also I have an older brother, so it was more of the family that was putting that pressure on me. And I don't think it was intentional. It was just something like, if you're getting a C in math, a C in my home was not considered great. So the expectation was pretty high. And I mean, now looking back, I realized that there was a lot of academic trauma, and knowing that and seeing that in my students, I really, really work actively against that, and to, be creating these healing-centered environments, because I don't want them to feel a certain way.
Yeah. Wow. Here's a thought from my wife about math in school. She said as a thought exercise, right? Like, what if math is a way to sort of sort through the kids who are rule followers, because those kids never really question like, why do I need to know this? Why am I doing this? Right? And it's like just to see if people are going through like that, and then the ones who have difficulty are often like they're not interested because they're trying to think forward, right? And they sort of like squash that out of them, or they make them feel that something's wrong.
Well, I have a very interesting memory when I was in kindergarten, and I mean, not sure who's having this existentialist thought in kindergarten, but I do remember thinking, why am I here? Like, why do I exist? Right? And I was 5, and that has stayed with me. I'm 40 now. That has stayed with me all of these years. And I think that, my mind, my multiple intelligences lean towards linguistic and definitely more on the creative side. So having to be forced to memorize equations and formulas, that's just not how my brain works. My brain works in memorizing stories and in having that human connection. And so finding a community that actually valued that, and I believe that it was early on with all of my teachers and in the stories that I was reading, and eventually meeting authors and just knowing, oh, okay, this is actually a really, really beautiful thing, and I don't have to conform to anyone's standard of intelligence because this is my own, and just finally really coming to terms with that.
Yeah, I'm really curious about educational trauma, because that's, as soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I think I had a lot of that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to jump ahead. So it sounds like you really had a good experience there.
I did.
That's cool. And it's sort of shaping, what would you eventually go into. So where does your journey go after there?
Yeah, so after I went to Arroyo High School, and being in a very sheltered private Catholic school and then going to a public school, that was a bit of an adjustment. But I did well. I was in ASB. Track, that was so much fun. Drill team, made a lot of friends. And my sister is actually nonverbal, and she's autistic. She's 4 years younger than I am. So I would kind of seek out kids that were in SPED.
So you went from this small private school to Arroyo, and it's a pretty large public school, right?
It is a very large public school, and very, very quickly becoming involved in different activities. So ASB and drill team and track, and I made a lot of friends. It was, it was really nice. But one thing that it kind of took me aback was, there was just the amount of like drugs and, just all of the things that I was actually not really exposed to, and learning how to sort through all of that, and really finding my place, and at the same time being open to new friends, and how do I maintain actually like who I am in the midst of so much that I was being exposed to as well. So it was a good experience, but I knew that I kind of couldn't wait to get to college.
A good experience.
It was a good experience. I would say I learned a lot about myself. I learned how to maintain my own identity in the midst of a lot of peer pressure, and not really to conform to maybe, kind of like everyone else was doing.
It's interesting that you categorize it like that, because those have nothing to do with academics.
Right.
Yeah. And when I think about like kids going into school and all the things that they have to think about, deal with, worry about, that are not academic related.
Right.
Yeah. And you're, it's like, then where is the space and energy and time for academic learning?
Right.
And so many kids, I think, are like entering into that environment every day, worrying about so many other things.
Oh yeah. I would say that I probably worried about my academics. It was maybe like 40-60. So 40% worrying about my academics, because that kind of came a bit easier, and I enjoyed specifically English, as you could tell, my bent towards that. And then the other, percentage was really navigating social life and sports and drill team and things like that. So it was all of the other stuff that I guess was not anticipating prior to leaving my small school.
I guess that you were also probably more well prepared entering high school than maybe many of your peers who had come from the local public schools.
I think so. I think in one sense I was well prepared because I had a really firm foundation in who I was, in what I knew I wanted to bring to the table, and I wanted to show up and really be a positive person to my friends and to whatever groups I was going to be a part of. And then I think I was probably ill prepared in the sense of not really fully, again, understanding like how hard that was going to be. It probably sounds like, oh, those two are, opposite, but somehow it all worked together.
Yeah. So you went from not wanting to do English to actually liking it, and then you continued to excel and like it in high school. Right. And then where does your journey go next?
Yeah, so then I attended Azusa Pacific University, and I received my bachelor's in English, my master's in education, and my credentials for teaching.
All at
APU, right? And it's so funny because my mom attended a church in Pasadena, and she was such a huge fan of the guest pastor, and she said, he's a professor at APU, and because my mom's influence has been so deep, I actually didn't apply to any other colleges. It was just APU. That's what it is, and it was a beautiful time, but it was a different type of environment because in my very first English class, I was actually the only Latina in the class. A lot of people were coming in from Oregon and from Washington, and just thought, oh, this is so different from Arroyo High School. So
the demographics at Arroyo is primarily
right,
Latino.
Primarily Latino and Asian. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so you're still in the public educational systems, traditional, right?
Yeah.
Here's a syllabus. Here's what we're going to study,
yes.
And then we're going to test you either an essay or some sort of quiz or test, right? Mm-hmm. And did you feel like you were in control of what you wanted to learn, and that you were an excited learner, like you were still seeking out information for your own sake? So
I would say that during my college years, it was very set out, right? Like the syllabus is there, and the professors were great. I remember having the freedom to choose certain projects that I wanted to partake in, and even my master's thesis, it was studying literature as a means of evoking compassion in middle school students. So that was a very targeted topic that I chose. So there was some freedom, but really still in the constraints of conventional schooling, because that's essentially what a lot of higher education is. But I knew that once I became a teacher, I definitely knew that I was a different type of teacher and a lot more experiential, project, place-based. And then that has led to the creation of a micro school and all sorts of other things.
Studying literature to evoke
compassion in middle school students.
So can you talk about that? Sure.
So one of the most interesting topics of my life really has been how does literature play a role in not only provoking us to empathy and compassion, but then taking action upon those upon the empathy and the compassion. So we could feel so deeply about something, but then it's really the taking action part that students need to be explicitly taught. If not, we could have a bunch of, people who feel badly about something, or, and I'm a highly sensitive person, so I feel everything. But but I remember reading the Diary of Anne Frank, 7th grade. It was not required reading for some reason. That was not, we had a lot of required reading, but that was not one of them. It is in most schools though. And I remember just crying in my room so much when I came to the end of the book. And my mom, she didn't really know she had not studied World War II that much. So she didn't really know, what was happening and why I was so distraught. But all of that to say that because that book had such a deep impact on me, I knew that like literature for me was going to just be so huge, and it has been. Even as I homeschool my son, we read Wonder together, and if you haven't read Wonder, it's a really, really great book. But it's a child that has craniofacial situation going on, and he's picked on, and so it does teach children how to then lean into the empathy and see others and step into their shoes, and instead of otherizing and discriminating.
Wow. What church was it in Pasadena that your mom?
Oh, it's Calvary Chapel, Pasadena.
Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, Calvary Chapel.
Is that on Colorado?
It is. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I know where that. Next to Sahara?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah.
They changed owners, by the way. So it's a little different now. But so when did the idea come about in your mind to challenge the system or sort of try to stir things up?
Yeah, so I actually was a high school librarian for a very long time, and I taught high school English as well. And I knew, even before that, I taught middle school. And so I knew that in my own classroom, I was, in a sense, creating these micro schools already, these communities that were so different because we were always a family. I mean, really, whatever class I had, we were a mini family. And I remember going paintballing with my students and their parents, and just really, really fun things. And then as my students got older, I would go to their weddings, and so just really community, family-like environment. But that was not always welcomed by administration. There's boundaries, and you just can't do certain things, and that never boded well with me. I just thought, well, my students are younger than I am, but there's so much that I'm learning from them, and I don't see this as as some sort of project where I'm filling students' buckets with knowledge, but it's a lighting of a fire. And so really thinking of myself more as a guide than anything. But I didn't know about Montessori. I didn't know about Reggio Emilia or self-directed learning at that time. Although I think that I was always being kind of moved in that direction, I just didn't know it until much later.
I love the analogy of the bucket, right? Because like so many people think that way, right? And I love it for being able to describe why that's not the case. But so you're already developing your own style based on like all these experiences, and sort of it sounds like what comes naturally to you, creating these micro schools. And as you described, it's not always welcome.
Right. Yeah. And I think challenging the status quo comes with some backlash. The main argument is, aren't students being siphoned into alternative, unconventional forms of schooling, and away from public schools? And my response is that public schools siphon students away from each other all the time. So really there's a place for public, private, charter, all sorts of iterations of schooling, and parents should have the agency and ownership to choose what is the best fit. And so that's really what I've been dedicating myself to for the past few years, ever since 2020, actually.
Isn't public school the experiment?
That's exactly what I say. And I really think, the term traditional schooling is, this apprenticeship mindset. it's a home education versus a systematized conventional way of schooling. So I really try to stay away from describing conventional schooling as, more of a traditional, quote unquote, traditional form, because it really is the experiment.
Yeah, I learned that it's actually was given to us by, I think, the Prussian military, and their desire was, to create workers.
Right. Yeah. You got
workers.
bells, you have schedules. So we've stayed away from, we actually have a daily rhythm, but it's a low stress environment. We don't have any desks. We don't have anything of the sort, because we're not trying to actually replicate public school. And I did that when the pandemic hit. We pulled our son out of his private school, and I bought the cutest vintage desk and I painted it. And I think he may have sat in it for like first day of school pictures, and that's it. He never really sat in it. We were doing all kinds of other really wonderful things, and it wasn't busy work. It wasn't worksheets. It was that life is education. Education is life. It all goes hand in hand. And so he doesn't really have a concept of schooling as a systematized way of being, but rather it's just a natural part of our daily life.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have to report like what they're learning, right?
Yes.
And this is in Canada, so we report twice a year, and so we have to sort of translate what it means to do life into those academic like terms, right?
Right.
Exploring the weather and doing supply runs and grocery shopping, like this is what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
But they're learning math, they're learning like skills that they need to live.
Yeah.
They're always doing it. It just never stops.
It doesn't ever stop. No. And I think about, so we, at the Almani airport, they have helicopter rides and like plane rides sometimes, and it's really fun. And we took our son, and just looking at, really how our airplanes created, and how, all of like the aerodynamics, and just taking all of that into consideration. And so he went on a helicopter ride, and I mean, to be able to look at the city from a bird's eye view, that's so cool. And I don't think he would have these experiences were it not for the freedom and flexibility that we have in our schedule. And that's what homeschooling has really allowed for us to do, really cool things like that.
Yeah. I'm curious about how, if you had to convince your husband, because I think for a lot of moms who want to do it or explore it, that's a big challenge, right? And whether it's your husband or maybe even family members, the knee-jerk reaction is like, what about socialization, right? And so did you have to have that conversation with your husband? How did that go? Or was he on board from the beginning?
He actually was on board very, very, very much. And I think it's because we saw the need for our son to be learning in real life. And he was on Zoom during that time, and it was very disconnected for him and for so many kids. I mean, it was a very, very tough time for the whole world. You can only imagine a 5-year-old trying to learn on Zoom, right? It wasn't ideal, and that's not how we wanted him to spend his one wildly beautiful existence. And, we took the leap, and then, but my husband really has been on board from the very beginning. And that socialization question, I think it would come up a little bit more often in the beginning, but our family members have seen, everything that we do. And so I think we actually are probably, busier, and the goal is not to be busier, but we are pretty busy as a family, going to museums and checking out so many cool things that are available for kids. And our son, he loves musical theater. So he has rehearsal, and he, and shows. And so inviting our friends to see what he's doing, and then they realize, oh, this is actually a much richer experience than they probably could have ever imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. Our youngest, often, when adults speak to her, they ask what grade she's in, and they're like, wow, you speak like incredibly well. They're shocked at her level of communication. And someone said, oh, you must spend a lot of time around adults. When I'm around her family, Victoria's family, I remember one time Vital came on a trip. He's not around homeschoolers, and he was speaking to one. I think she was maybe 12 or 13, and he said, oh, what about socialization? And so I just sat back. I was like, let me just hear what she has to say. And she just like totally went off and like educated him on that as a 9 or 10-year-old. And I was like, and his eyes were just getting so wide.
Exactly.
But the level of confidence and the ability to have conversation and hold conversation with adults, peers, like I never seen that anywhere else outside of the homeschool.
I think there's, there's this mindset that kids need to be around same age peers and, all of that. And it's fine. There's parts of it that are good, but I would say the majority of us, I'm not spending time specifically with people who are my exact same age that are doing the exact same things that I'm doing. And I think the beauty of interacting with so many different ages when you're in a multi-age setting is that you learn from the older kids potentially, right? There's like some fun collaboration, and I know that's been the case for the students that we have at our micro school. And then the older kids are able to have their youth preserved a bit longer when they're interacting with the younger kids. And I think there's magic in that.
Yeah. I think you describe it much more like gently. I just say there's something weird about sticking all the same age people in one room for 8 hours in a day. Like that's not normal.
Right.
You know?
And we do have like our pre-K to second grade sister program. So it's another micro school founder, and she teaches, she has her doctorate in early childhood education, and she did such a great job, follows the Reggio Emilia style. So pre-K to second, and then right now our oldest student is in 8th grade, so 3rd to 8th grade with us. And when we go on hikes, like we recently went apple picking, and the older kids were holding the hands of the little ones and trying to help them, reach the apples, and it's just so beautiful to see. And I think that it's a much more natural way of being. So it's not that we're necessarily stuck in a classroom all the time, because we are place-based, so we're out in the community quite a bit. But knowing the strengths of your student and operating from a strengths-based perspective versus, quote unquote, like a deficit-based one. And if I see that, there's a student in particular that comes to mind, and he is like the big brother of the group. And he actually has 2 younger siblings that are there as well. But I could definitely see him being a great father someday, which sounds kind of weird because he's only in 6th grade. But he just has such a tender heart. Like, hey, are you okay if someone gets hurt, playing basketball? Or, like, hey, you're okay, you need a Band-Aid, and, come to tell us. And I don't know, just very mindful. And I think that he's kind of honing some beautiful skills at a very early age. And I don't know what his path is going to look like, but I do know that we all appreciate him so much, so there's something really, really cool about that to me. And then the younger kids, of course, they're able to look up to some of the older ones.
Yeah. My wife was educated in there's a wide range of kids, and she described the same things. And I think, Victoria, you described that too, right? Like she's one of 6, all homeschooled, and like helping not just academically, but nurturing, when you're not torturing the younger ones, but like nurturing them, right? Like guiding them.
Yeah, you help watch the younger ones, take care of them. It's just like doing life together, look out for each other.
So I want to get into what place-based and educational trauma, but we ask each guest to bring an item with them. What did you bring with you today?
So I actually brought a picture of my first class that I ever taught, and this is middle school. And I just love each student here. I mean, truly, this was me at 23 years old, and I always wanted to be a teacher. So at 5 years old on career day, I dressed up as a teacher, and like, what do teachers look like, right? So I had a little chalkboard with me. It's like a little mini one. And I remember throwing on a feather boa. My mom said, teachers don't wear feather boas. And I'm like, oh, I do. So I think that was an indicator of the rebel educator in me from an early age. But yeah, I love these kids. And this was really the start of my professional career.
Awesome. Can I see?
Yeah, of course.
And did your mom let you wear the feather boa?
Oh, she did. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I wore the feather boa.
Very nice. Thank you for bringing this in. And this says Santa Fe Springs Christian School.
Right.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into your school and those topics, but let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Sometimes, even the best of us can slip up. That's why the law offices of Scott Wormuth are here to pick you back up again.
And while they strive to get you the biggest compensation possible, oh my gosh!
Their main concern is your health and recovery. They work closely with doctors and insurance companies to make sure you get the proper medical treatment.
Initial consultations are free, so give them a call.
At the law offices of Scott Wormuth, we're with you all the way.
I'm Scott Wormuth. We've been fighting for your rights for more than 40 years.
All right, we're back with Lizette. Lizette, before the break, you were sharing this picture with us and your rebel spirit and bringing the feather boa to career day. But before we get back to your story, when we come back from the break, we like to ask questions from this deck of cards called Icebreakers. And it's just a way for the audience to get to know us a little bit better. So Victoria and I will also answer this. What is one family tradition you would like to carry on in the future?
Ooh, okay. So I would say that Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday, and it's because every year I help my mom cook, and there's something about the aromatic veggies and butter and onions and carrots all being mixed in together, and so that's something that I have really, really tried to carry on with my son, and it's been awesome. So I like to eat. That's always a win.
Awesome. Victoria?
I think Christmas cookies, baking Christmas cookies together and just like making a ton and then giving it out to family and friends whenever we see them. Yeah.
So yes, Christmas cookies and Christmas lights cruising. I don't know how long that will last because, they're going to get older. But that's something that we would love to do as a family. But Christmas cookies, Laurel made that a thing, right? And they get so excited to put on all the decorations, and you can just see in their face they can't wait to eat it. And yeah, it was just really, really fun. And I hope I can do that with them when they're adults. And then we can do it with their children if they choose to have. So if you're watching or listening, what is one family tradition you would like to carry on in the future? Let us know in the comments. So Lizette, I'm interested in specifically two things that you had described. One is place-based and educational trauma. So can you touch on those?
Sure. So thinking about place-based learning is really about leaning into the community that surrounds the learning environment. So at our micro school, we have some amazing community partners that will, there's a vegan chef from Boyle Heights, and she comes to our learning environment, and she's cooking with the kids, and they're really getting in there and making homemade pasta. And I mean, it's so cool. And I'm not the biggest cook, but I have learned so much from her. And then we have a songwriter and an art teacher. He's doing printmaking with them. So really involving the community and then going out to all of these different places, whether, again, it's museums or we took the kids indoor skydiving. They were learning about science. And it's just so amazing when you take in the geographical location and you truly elevate it and say, we have been placed here for a purpose. The community has something to offer, but we also have something to offer to the community. And a lot of times community members, they don't know like how they can specifically help or how they can contribute. And so part of what I do is, like kind of pointing out their strengths, like, hey, you're an amazing writer. Maybe you're a children's book author, like come by and, go through the writing process with our kids, right? And so more often than not, people are really willing to do that. And we're going to have our children's business fair coming up soon. And that's another great way for that entrepreneurial spirit to be developed. And there's a lot of local business owners, small business owners that are going to be involved with that and mentoring and things like that. So it's really what you want to make of it in your community. And so we just love place-based learning. And there was even a point where we had an RV and we would load up the kids in the RV and we would go to parks, and it was just so cool. And we recently sold the RV to a road schooling mom and her daughter. And they're homeschooling all throughout the U.S. So I don't know where they are at the moment, but they're somewhere in the country.
I had never heard that term until you just said it, but I instantly understood what it meant. That's so cool. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Like, so as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, one of the things that I would love to do is, and I used to do this before the pandemic, was I used to take my clients hiking throughout the year. Yeah. And I would plan out the whole hiking season from, I think, maybe March to October. And they would get increasingly more difficult if they chose, and then they can see, the distance and length. And because I was like, well, so many people want to hike, but they don't know where to start or what they need and all that, or to feel safe. So I that would be so cool.
Can you please join our nature days? So we actually do have nature immersion days, and we go hiking. And it's so beautiful to see some of our kids that have never, like we went to Eaton Canyon not that long ago, and there's a few streams, and it was scary for some of our kids because they had just never gone hiking, and they felt very wobbly and they didn't want to get wet. So they're trying to, walk on the rocks. And by the end of that hiking trip, it was so cool because everyone was soaked, right? Their pants were soaked, and they didn't even mind, and we were, again, the older kids were picking up the little kids and trying to get them across, and it was just so cool. And Eaton Canyon is not a very long hike, but for a beginner, it could seem like conquering, the world. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now I want to go to the other term, educational trauma. What is that?
Right. So my husband and I were foster adoptive parents, and a lot of our background is in decoding behaviors. And, when you see a kid who is throwing a tantrum or acting out, a lot of times they get kicked out of the classroom because they're quote unquote defiant, hard-headed, stubborn, all of the above. And it's not so much that we see the behavior as a problem, but rather it's the inability to decode that behavior by the adult that's the problem. So even if you have like an eloper, a kid that runs off, I'll never forget that this kid mentioned when he saw his teacher, the teacher looked so stern. She's just, and then there was another teacher, and her affect was so different, her countenance was so different. And he stopped running when he saw the kindness on the other teacher's face. And a lot of what we are projecting onto students is causing academic trauma, whether that's through expectations that are so incredibly difficult to achieve, which we should have expectations, right? But those expectations should involve families' input and the kids' input. And I think that we just somehow that's not even a part of the conversation. Teachers have expectations and administrators have expectations. So how can we involve families a whole lot more in a much more meaningful way that actually counts? And even thinking about love languages, like for our individualized learning plans, every kid gets a plan. So it's not just kids that have IEPs necessarily, it's everybody. And we incorporate the 5 love languages, because maybe I'm a quality time person, but my student is an acts of service receiver, right? Like that's, and I don't want to be missing the mark. And then looking at multiple intelligences. So really leaning into academic trauma and saying that kids are not trying to give us a hard time. They literally are having a hard time, and just reframing that whole entire narrative. There's a really, really cool therapist, and she told me whatever is hysterical is historical. So if a kid is having, you know, some strong feelings surrounding something, like I would cry when I had to sit and memorize my multiplication tables. I mean, physically, it was painful for me, and it was because I had a hard time memorizing. And I was not like let off the hook. It was like, well, if you don't memorize that, you're not going to go to your Girl Scout meeting. I'm like, okay, so then it's like a double, you know, negative here. I'm having a very difficult time. My nervous system was dysregulated, and then I'm being punished because I can't do this, right? So really looking at how we're contributing to this academic trauma and starting to create a lot more healing-centered environments.
All of that resonates with me. I think you maybe would know that just from the conversations we had, but that is an uphill battle with so many people who believe, like, you know, that they need to be toughened up in a certain way, or that the things that they experienced were okay. You know, that's so tough. I must have written like 10,000 standards growing up and gotten kicked out of class like so many times. And for just, this is kind of funny, right? Go to school for socialization, but you know what? Don't socialize.
Don't socialize. Yeah.
Don't socialize. Well, you know, I'm like, you know, what is it that you want me to do actually? Right. But, yeah. So, and we were sort of talking during the break about how the curiosity is sort of like pushed out of them, right? For being forced to memorize things or experience a teacher's glare that they may not be able to articulate why that bothers them, but they just know that it does.
Right. Well, there's that book, right? The Body Keeps a Score. And sometimes like we have these feelings even as adults, and we remember like, you know, my mom would always say, oh, you have a mental block. And it's like, well, I think at the time I was not able or ready maybe to lean into what was being forced upon me academically. But then I was able to just dive in head first for other things that were so interesting to me, and no one had to, you know, drill that into me. I mentioned my son earlier that he's really into musical theater, and my husband and I, we're not, you know, we're not necessarily, we will watch musicals with him, and, you know, we support him, but that is solely something that he has come to find out. And it's so beautiful to not place our own expectations. Would I love for him to be a voracious reader? Of course, right? But that might come in time, or it might not. But just because I enjoy something doesn't mean that he isn't learning and honing in on his multiple intelligences, which in this case, he's a very kinesthetic learner. You know, he likes to perform, and he actually likes the adrenaline that performing brings. Not necessarily what I'm seeking, but his journey is different than mine. And I think a lot of it has to do with our ego as parents or as educators, and you know, like we know best. And it's like, do we? Right? Like we may know our own experience, but this is a whole other human being. You know, he has his own sets of you know, interests and likes and dislikes, and why in the world would I minimize that? Because he has something so beautiful to contribute to the world, and he's an example of all of our kids, right? But it's the working from the ground up now that I see as the next step, as opposed to this top-down approach of administration and a lot of red tape, and this is what your kids should be learning and doing, and standardized testing, and we don't have children so that they can live a standardized life. That's not the goal. So really, it's saying, how do we break away from standardization, because we are all incredibly beautiful, unique individuals.
Yeah. Every time I hear you speak, you definitely have the demeanor to deliver that message, because that is tough. And I know I already know the opposition. I know all the things that you must have to come against. I trained a high school senior who was accepted to Princeton, and the first day that she met me, her social skills were really poor, in that she was obviously very fearful, and that manifested in disrespect. And saying that I put her in her place is not the right words to use. Like, I was just very, very firm and hard with her. And then she sort of got it, right? And then our relationship evolved. And then she said, I'm going to Princeton and all my knowledge is theoretical. She's like, I can't even wash the dishes or do my laundry. And she was crying. And I was like, wow. And she said, you know what I really want to do? She's like, I want to shoot a bow and arrow.
Oh.
And I was like, wow. Yeah, so I will always remember that experience. Here's someone, like, from the outside, everybody's like, wow, this person is doing it. She's achieving what everybody says is the goal. And inside, she's like really crushed. She knows, she's smart enough to know what she knows is just all theoretical.
Right.
And
I think there's something to be said about that. Like, most of us have jumped through the hoops. We can play the game. And I think there is now this educational revolution. So many founders of these programs, so many homeschooling parents that are saying, we've played the game and now it's time to kind of dismantle this, because it's not serving anyone well. And not all of it is, doom and gloom at all. It's not like that. There's some good. And I think that's how, I kind of view myself very much as a generational cycle breaker, and saying, I will take, and a lot of us are in this boat, I will take the good that I learned, but I'm also going to leave what didn't serve me well. And I'm doing that with education in this sense, right? Like, there's some really, really good things. And there's some others that were so traumatizing. And I continue to see that in kids. And I don't want that for them. So how can we do better? Because we know better now.
Yeah. In, I think, 6th grade, when they had those multiplication tests and it was timed.
Oh, right.
I always was number one. And that came at the cost of months, maybe years of crying at my brother's insistence to learn. Like, horrible, right? I knew those timetables before I was 6.
Wow. Yeah.
But it was horrific.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And people see that, they're like, oh, wow, that's really cool.
So good.
Really? Because I could just do it on my calculator now.
Like, I know. It's not worth what I've come to find out, as a homeschooling mom, is that curriculum, it's always connection over curriculum. It cannot be the other way around. And new teachers will ask me, or, oh, what kind of curriculum? And even new homeschooling families too. Oh, the curriculum, everyone's so caught up with the curriculum. I could go to the thrift store right now, pick up some books, pick up, a few items here and there. I'm sure I can have a whole entire year planned out, because a lot of it has to do with the pedagogy. Can you actually allow kids to learn? Like, letting go of this need to control, and we actually don't need to control. We see so many homeschoolers that they've gone off to do such beautiful things, and we don't need to control every single minute of every day. And in the curriculum, it's very, very much secondary to how are kids actually going to go ahead. Like, one of our students at the school, and I say that there are students because most of the families that come to us, maybe single moms that want to homeschool, but they're working full time and they can't homeschool their children. all the way through, or maybe 2 working parents, and so they come to us. So I would say we're a co-op, but it's mainly my husband, myself, and another teacher that teach along with our community partners. So really thinking about this one student, he's on the spectrum and he loves engineering, absolutely loves engineering. He loves creating models, and he created this really cool hand, like a robotic hand. And he's so proud of himself. And this is someone that had a really difficult time in a conventional school setting. Why? Because he's neurodivergent. And if you're neurodivergent, then you're not conforming and you're not doing what needs to be done, and you're not sitting quietly for hours at a time. And he has a lot of ideas. And who are we to squash that? And I think when we force kids to learn before they're ready, like you have, kindergartners right now that are being like forced to read. And if, God forbid, they're quote unquote behind, it's such a problem, right? Oh my goodness, such a problem. And I'm really just saying that we need to take a step back, let them learn on their timeline. It will happen. It's just if we do it too soon, we really will extinguish that fire. And we don't want to do that, because they're going to view education as something awful. They're not going to be able to really develop a love of learning and become the lifelong learners. I know that phrase is overused, lifelong learners, but I do see a lot of people who actually are lifelong learners, and when you've met them, like, oh, okay, yeah, this is 104-year-old, 102-year-old Nana, and she's still learning, so just very different. When you meet that kind of person, and someone that's just like, I graduated, I did what I had to do. That's not what we want.
I want to repeat what you said earlier. Was so beautiful. You said connection over curriculum. Like, you can have the greatest curriculum, and if you're not connected with your children, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I think there's also like a whole generation of kids who have done what they thought was going to bring them happiness, success, and they're discovering like it's actually not true. Whether it's like a difficulty getting a job, or just where they are in terms of their own happiness. So I pray that you have much impact, and that it's just exponential in the San Gabriel Valley.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lizette, we're going to move on to the final segment of the show, where we get to learn what you like about the San Gabriel Valley.
Awesome.
So, Lizette, this is the SGV3. This is where we ask you to share your 3 favorite or most memorable places or experiences in the San Gabriel Valley.
Awesome. So I really love this question, and I've been thinking about it all day because I have a lot. So
it's hard, right, to narrow it down?
Yeah, definitely narrowing it down to 3. But I would say that Nativity School in Almani, so life-changing, has shaped me in every way possible. So shout out to all the nuns that came from Ireland in the early 20s, because you really reached a community of kids, and I'm one of those kids, so thank you. Next is Serenity, and it's an adoption, it's a foster and adoption agency, and we were actually matched with our son there, and it no longer exists. It actually merged with another company and kind of dissolved, but Serenity in West Covina, because they just matched us with our son, and we could not be more grateful. And then the third one, there's a lot of food places, but I have to say that my comfort food is pho. So there's this little spot in Almani, and it's Bon Mechi Cali, and they just have really good broth. And when I'm feeling, a little under the weather, that's my go-to spot. And there's a lot of other spots, but I will give a shout out to them. So.
That was a surprise. I was not expecting that. Yeah. But I think in El Monte, there's actually a lot of good pho
Yes.
places.
Yes, yeah. No, I do love fun. I mean, even like spring, all of the food. But and I would also say, like, we have a lot of good boba spots too. But I've been laying low on the boba as of recent. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those with us and sharing about your journey and your, I'll say passion for, to bring about this change. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So compasseducators.com has everything that you would want to know about Compass Educators, our Holistic Educational Services Center, as well as our micro school and California Microschool Collective.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lizette. I'm very happy that you came today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there you go. Another episode in the books for you. I really enjoyed this episode. I think I shared my views on education. Certainly have shared that Victoria has been home educated and that my wife and I do that. But sort of this idea of maybe the issues with public school. And I think the best way that I found to introduce people to that topic is to have them like consider their own journey through that. What was that like? And I think most people, if they're able to have that conversation and reflect honestly, they will know that it could be improved. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but there are definitely ways that it can be improved. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. You can find our full back catalog of episodes on our website, mysgv.net. And if you want to support the show in a more meaningful way, please become a patron on Patreon under MySGV Podcast. And until next week, we'll see you then. Thank you for joining us on the MySGV Podcast. Check out more of our content on our website, mysgv.net. This show was produced by Scott Wormuth, directed by Russell Mano, edited by Victoria Allers, and original music by Yone OG. If you'd like to join us next week as we capture and share more stories from our diverse community, feel welcome.
Nice matter. No, kind of matter.